Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 88 pro tips for 88 brawlers inside our Brawl Stars. This video took a long time to make, so make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Let's jump into the tips. 8-bit's tip is to always keep your turret in a safe place, whether that's just a little bit further back on the map, whether that's behind a wall, an unbreakable wall. You want to be always close to your super as well, so you can cycle through to them, but keep it safe because that's the best part about 8-bit. With Amber, you want to move counterclockwise around the safe and delete the safe with your gadget, because people underestimate Amber in heists particularly, but you can melt the safe near enough quicker than anybody. With Angela, you want to make sure that you auto aim to start charging your shots a lot quicker, so as soon as you let out your shot, hold down your auto aim button and you'll always have another 4K shot available. A tip with Ash is to make sure to throw your rats and then use your heal gadget, because when your rats hit somebody, they'll actually raise you back up again, so especially if you're weak, you want to make sure you get this combo sorted. With Barley, the longer the super distance, the more spread out his super is, so you want to use this to effect, because you want to cover as much as the map as possible for aerial denial, so make sure you're moving back whilst you're supering. Tip with B is to make sure to hardly ever shoot with B at maximum range. Main reason being is because her projectile speed is super slow, so it's actually really hard to hit consistent shots. So if you can, make sure to move up a bit closer. That's why the pros actually like the shield star power, because it's a lot easier to hit towards, I would say, the middle of B's attack range slash towards the end of it. Just make sure you're not consistently shooting at the tip. A tip with Bell is to make sure to shoot your super rapidly after your main attack to catch people off guard. I do this a lot of the time because people just never expected it. If they miss your super, then you're going to hit your shot, and if you miss your shot, you're going to hit your super. A pro tip with Berry is to always make sure that you're taking damage, because then you can constantly throw your shots on the ground and that will heal you up, charging up your super, charging up your hypercharge. As long as you're not feeding a game-changing super, it's okay to do this, because that's how you affect the game with berries, to farm as many supers as possible. So with BB, everybody knows about the double bubble trick, and to be honest, it's actually quite pointless. You're hardly ever going to pull it off in a real game. But with BB, it's just to know that walls are your best friends. So whether you knock back someone into a wall to help you just get the kill a lot quicker, whether it's to line up your bubbles so you can hit them multiple times through walls, walls are your best friends with BB. The best tip with Bo is to make sure that you know about his two attack patterns, so you can move left to right if you want to spread the attack and if you're unsure on where the opponent's going to go. But if you're really locked in, you want to get as much damage as possible, you can move right to left and your attack's going to be a lot more focused. I couldn't think of many tips with Bonnie, but the best one for me is just to make sure you're supering at maximum range. This is because you can catch the opponents by surprise. Yeah, there's just hardly any pro tips with her. Best tip with Brock is to make sure you're activating your hypercharge after your super, because this will boost the super damage and actually make it a lot more worthwhile, because his hypercharge super is actually terrible. This tip with Bull will make you turn into Pika. People don't know about this interaction, so with your supercharge gear, it changes the interaction. So when you hit someone with your super, you'll only need one more hit to charge your super again, whilst without the supercharge gear, you'll need to hit the opponent 2 times after hitting them with your super. So this essentially means you're going to be chaining supers a lot more. So again, if you want to be Pika and charge around like crazy, hop on the supercharge gear, hit the opponent once with your super, one more attack. But I think for the most time, the other gears are probably better with Bull, but again, it depends whether you want to turn into Pika. So with Buster, I really like his super and gadget combination. I know that's using 2 parts of his strongest kit, but it's just really good to confirm kills. You push the opponents back with your super, and once you get close enough, just tap your gadget, pull them close, and kill them with ease. This is such a deadly combo. Buzz's tip is to make sure to make cool plays with his spider hook glitch. Again, I don't know whether this is actually a good tech, but if you want to make some cool clips with him, you can essentially just throw out your gadget and a super at the same time, and you'll just fly around and glitch around like Spider-Man. The tip with Buzz Lightyear is if you play this brawler, just uninstall the game. The best tip with Byron is to make sure you're auto-aiming your super. The reason why is because you pretty much never hit, unless the opponent has some type of dash mechanic, of course, and they can juke it out, but it's just safe to auto-aim it. The tip with Carl is to make sure you're shooting out your main attack before you're supering. This allows you to charge your super back much quicker, increasing the DPS as well, and of course, you want to cycle your super as much as possible with Carl. The tip with Charlie is that to know that you can wall peek like Carl's attack. It's a little bit harder to get used to, but literally just wall peeking around the wall, just shoot, move to the right around the wall, and you'll be able to stay safe from damage whilst hitting the opponent. Tip with Chester is to make sure you're changing your bell combination per kind of interaction. So with assassins or just big tanks, you want to go 3-4-1 combination, because that's just going to get that big heavy damage as quickly as possible, which you need if an assassin is dashing onto you. And from all other interactions, you just go with the 2, 3, 4 bell combination and waste that first ammo from spawn most of the time. I know with this star power rework that it's just a lot better with the first bell now, but it's just better overall if you go with these combos. The best tip for Chuck is to know that you can hit the high safe twice by putting the pole just a little bit above the high safe and then making sure that you position yourself well. This will take a little bit of practice, but this is really good in pro games. I know that there's some good other combinations where you can hit the high safe like 3 or 4 times, but you're never ever going to pull that off against good players. So this is just better for the pros. It was hard to find any pro tips for Clancy, but there's a couple. So the first one is to combine your gadget and your super, because you'll gain tokens a lot quicker through the super's projectiles. And then the next one is just to know Clancy's super pattern. So it starts off in and then it spreads out, it then stays out for a little bit, then goes back in. So that's just a cool tip to know to maximize your super damage. Colette's tip is to know that a heal gadget deals more damage to the safe than your regular attack. So it'll deal an extra 400 damage, but it's just useful to know in case you end up killing the opponent quickly, then you just get some extra damage on the safe. Holt's tip is to make sure that you're moving with the enemy to lead your shots into them. So a lot of time with Colt, you can actually get away with auto-aiming if your movement is really good and it replicates where the opponent is going. One of the best tips for core dealers that I really like is to make sure that you're using the jump gadget and super at the same time. So of course you want to pop the gadget just before you use the super, but this is such a deadly combination, especially against throwers or squishy targets. They stand no chance. The best tip with Crow is to know that his hypercharge daggers don't just go where he lands to begin with. After a couple of seconds, they'll start to home in on where he is. So for the most part, sometimes you might not be able to jump directly on the high safe, but if you quickly move over to it and stand still, the daggers will then return, dealing pretty much 50% to the high safe. Arrow's tip is to know about his double knockback technique. So of course you knock back someone when you just roll through them, but at the end of your super, you knock them back again. So essentially you're going to knock back people 2 times with 1 super, and then of course you have 2 supers. So that's 4 knockbacks with 2 supers. I also learn how to use walls to the best advantage. So for example, if someone's close to a wall, I'll roll through them, bounce off the wall, and then by the time I return back to them, I'm knocking them back again. So it's just a win-win. This pro tip is difficult because he pretty much has 0 skill cap, but my tip is to try and sneak into fights, and Doug is all about trying to get into multiple people to cycle your super quickly. So of course if you can hit people, you know, 2 people with 1 piece of ammo, that's just going to enable you to cycle your wiener more effectively. Draco's tip is to make sure that you're shooting your main attack and then supering it. The reason why this is so good, it helps with a lot of different brawlers, but in particular Draco, it's because he can start chaining his super a lot faster. And then of course once you're supering again, you get more ammo, you get more HP as well, and especially if you're about to die, make sure you use your gadget and super in combination to keep you alive. Dynamite's pro tip is to predict your enemy's knockback position with your Dynamite super. So this will just take some getting used to, but of course if you're hitting the opponent with your bottom left of your super, they're going to be flying to the bottom left. So then you can predict that with your main attack and get some really quick kill combinations. Edgar's tip is to make sure that you gadget before jumping. This just helps you cycle super a lot quicker, and you need your super to help you, especially against other counters. So if you time your second super well to juke out their super, you're going to win that matchup. Primo's tip is that his combo is so deadly. His super and gadget is just so good. Once you super onto someone, of course, you knock them back, and then just as about to land, just hit them with the suplex gadget. That's again going to throw them, stun them, so they basically can't shoot for a couple of seconds, allowing you to buy more time and just destroy them easier. Em's tip is to attack once before using your gadget, and of course move back as well to get that additional damage. It'll actually deal an extra at least 1,000 damage through shooting before you gadget. Eve was a pretty difficult one to give a tip for, but with Eve, I make sure to place my super pretty aggressive, but not aggressive enough to get killed. So again, you don't want to put your Eve super all the way in the back because your hatchlings actually decay in health, so they'll just end up dying or being super squishy. So place it aggressive and use your pets to eat up the opponent's ammo, allowing you to push up the map. So with Fang, everybody knows about the 4 deadly combinations with Fang, but just in general, just know that his stun gadget actually helps him combo 2 attacks much quicker. So this is just really helpful in 1v1 fights. Frank's pro tip is to know that you can actually wall peek quite easily with your main attack and super. I've seen so many clips where this happens and it just catches people by surprise. Hale's tip is to make sure that you're supering the opponents first, especially with the stun star power, and then launch pad into them, closing the gap so you can deal more damage when you're up close, and then cycling supers much more effectively. It's just a really good combo. Gene's best tip is to make sure when you're pulling somebody to move back, to give you more time to reload, to give you more time to deal more damage. It also stuns them for longer as well, and also not knock them back afterwards as well to give you even more time to kill them. The tip with Gray, of course, everybody knows about the gadget and super combination to allow you to make a bigger pull, maybe like a mini gene pull. But the best one for me is actually his healing star power isn't actually just 1,300. It's actually 20% of that Brawler's HP. So for Gray, of course, it's around 1,300. But for tanks like Frank, it's like 2,500 healing. This is actually broken, and I feel like people don't actually know about this. With Griff, it's actually to abuse the fact that he deals 7k damage up close with his super. I believe that that is actually incorrect due to his damage scaling with his super. So this is actually technically a bug, and it's been a bug for a little while now. So yeah, abuse it whilst it's still there. The best tips with Grom is to make sure that you're shooting over walls as much as possible to give you an extra little bit of a range, but also a really good combination. What I like is that I like to use an attack straight away with my super. It gives you additional damage, and of course, if opponents not back with your super, they're not going to juke that main attack as well. With Gus, it's to know that you can actually get 2 ghosts with 1 piece of ammo, which is really good, but it only really happens at maximum range. So again, make sure you're playing at the tip of his range. You can either auto aim as quickly as possible just to get those 2 ghosts out, or just, you know, flick as quickly as possible. You need good ping to make this happen, but it's actually pretty effective. Hank's tip is to make sure that you're auto aiming with Milky Hank skin, because it actually gives you extra range. So I don't know whether it's just because it's bugged when you're aiming, I just don't understand it, but it gives you extra range, so just auto aim. With Jackie, it's hard to give a pro tip, but I use her gadget and hyper in combination for maximum speed, and you just run people down so quickly because you get a shield on top of that. Janet's tip is to time movements of the hypercharge bombs, so you're getting easy damage. So just as the bomb has just expired, then you can move forward a little bit. 1 bomb comes out pretty much every second, so make sure just to practice this in a training cave to really get the gist of it. Jesse's tip is to use the turret behind the wall to help pinch the opponents with slow, so it forces the opponents to make a move, because if you go around the wall one way, then they're forced to go down the right hand side, for example, and that's going to be where your turret is shooting them, so they're always going to be taking damage from somewhere. Juju's tip is all about being unpredictable. Think of Juju as Leon, but as a thrower, because a lot of the time her best asset is the invisibility from her gadget. Just making sure you're using all of your different abilities in as many possibles as way to catch the opponents by surprise every time. Kenji's tip is to maximize his DPS, so just before you're about to super, make sure that you've got your slash. So what you want to do is quickly slash super, and then when you land, you still have your slash attack available. Of course, it's supposed to actually alternate to his dash, so that just means you have extra damage. Just learn this tip and you're going to win a lot more 1v1s. Kit's tip is to know when you jump on top of people that are floating across water, you can actually stun lock them whilst they're on the water, and you can just actually kill them with your main attack. So this is just really good for counter brawlers like Angelo, Juju, etc. Larry's tip is to use walls to help guide Laurie back home, and just to get you some easy healing. So a lot of the time I'll just literally hug a wall, press my gadget, Laurie's gonna fly back, but Larry, he's just going to stay next to that wall and not be exposed like you normally would if you press the gadget. Leon's tip is to always go on the wide flank when you're using your invisibility, because opponents just won't predict that, and it's to attack right to left just like Bo to maximize your damage. Lily's tip is actually to prevent you losing extra DPS when you're supering it on top of someone. So what people do when they're using Lily, they just spam the attack as quickly as possible, but that actually makes you use an ammo before you've actually hit the opponent with your super. So just be patient, make sure you hit your super first, and then you want to spam your attack to maximize the damage and make sure you're hitting those 2 attacks. Lola's tip is to use the freeze gadget as a body block and place it directly on top of you. Of course, there's a few brawlers like Penny you don't want to stand behind when you've got this clone, but for the most part, it's just really good. It tanks a lot of those big heavy hitting shots. Lou's tip is to know that you completely counter Shade with just your super alone. So if Shade is inside of a wall or is just about to go close to a wall, just throw your super completely around that wall and Shade can't go through it whatsoever. So it's probably the best counter to Shade. Daisy's best tip is to make sure that you're supering and then using your dash gadget immediately after in combination to increase the range of your super and just catch opponents by surprise. Andy's tip is to always move after shooting to readjust to get better angles and just to stay active and moving, because the thing about Mandy is, of course, she's really vulnerable when you're just standing still all the time. So after every shot, just move so you're not an easy target. here. Max's tip is to make sure you're using wall to help self-pass to yourself and then gadget afterwards so you can tank incoming damage. This is really good in combination with her super, but just in general, it really helps just give you that extra bit of HP that you might have been missing to squeeze the ball in the net. People's tip is to auto-aim against normal movement speed brawlers and to aim versus faster. This is just a hack and you're never going to miss. Meg's tip is to not worry too much about aiming because of course she has a million projectiles, but it's actually to remember to strafe a lot whilst attacking because it actually takes a long time for her attack to fully unload, so don't just stand still, make sure you're constantly strafing left and right. Mede's tip is to make sure you're going counterclockwise around the safe to get as much damage as possible, but also make sure you're aiming your super to the right of opponents. Of course, the reason being is because if you're supering on top of opponents, of course, your notes aren't going to hit them. You can also, most of the time, around opponents, hit a triangle effect. First going from left to right, and then up, and then back to that left position. That's going to maximize your damage from Melody. Miko's tip is to know that during his super, he can actually heal, he can reload his ammo, and he can remove adverse effects. So this is just really important, especially when you think you're about to die against any type of poison. Well, you can keep yourself alive. Mo's tip is to know that one of Mo's star power actually gives him extra range. So the star power that gives you the extra shot for extra DPS, yes, that's good against tanks, but you get increased range with the other star power, which pros were abusing a lot in World Finals, and not even every pro knew that at the time. So it's just useful to know. The best Mortis tip is to make sure that you're always looking to connect onto two brawlers, whether that's with your main attack, whether that's with your super. It just enables him to cycle through to his super much more effectively, and that's the best thing about it. Mr. B's tip is to make sure you're activating your gadget just as someone's about to kill your porter. So even if it just takes an opponent's an extra ammo to kill the porter, that's actually quite essential because the best part about Mr. P is wasting all the opponent's ammo. And his best tip to get as much consistent damage as possible is actually overshooting your shot a lot of the time. This actually effectively makes you hit 2 of the 3 lines of damage. If you're a really good nanny player, of course you can get that maximum shot really easily, but against the pros it's really difficult, so this is just really useful against people that can juke really well. Peter's tip is just to know that she's really good at wall peeking and to abuse this mechanic as much as possible. People go about the stun technique that I've seen, but that is just pretty useless, and I've never seen anybody use that in pro play. The best Otis tip is to make sure you're using your super as close as possible to get easier kills. A lot of the time I like to sneak in bushes with Otis, super them point blank, and burst them down quickly. There's nothing they can do. Pam's tip is to make sure that you're shooting your shot more in the center, just like Colt, because just the way that her attack pattern works, it's just really inconsistent, whilst most of bolts do come out through the middle, so just make sure you're aiming more towards the center of that cone. Pearl's tip is to make sure that you're fully heated up to gadget somebody for extra damage. This is by far the best combination with Pearl. You see this used a lot in Knockout to confirm kills against snipers so easily. Penny's tip is to make sure to use star power number 1 and wait until the opponent, especially an assassin, is close to you. Then make sure you use your salty barrel gadget and just sit on top of it, shoot it, and you can deal like up to 8k 10k damage with one shot. It's so good for defending. Piper's tip is to actually know that Piper's maximum damage isn't just the tip, it's actually the top quarter of her main attack. So you'll be dealing 3,400 for a lot of her range, which is actually really useful to know. Poco's tip is to know that the Protective Tunes gadget literally means you're immune for 4 seconds from any type of poison damage. So if you're facing off against Willow, Crow, and Byron, they literally can't attack you for 4 seconds. RT's tip is actually to make sure to abuse his combinations as much as possible, because if you mark somebody, it's really easy to get that extra mark damage with chip brawlers with good range like Jean, for example, Crow, Lola. It's easy to get extra damage. Rico's tip is to make sure to always switch up your angles to cover as much of the map as possible. If you're constantly shooting the same point, opponents are going to be able to just look at where you're not shooting and just walk through, which people just think that you're easily covering the whole point, but you're not with Rico. And of course, spam that gadget. Rose's tip is to make sure to spam the auto aim button as quickly as possible and to connect bushes with your gadget. That's about it. Ruff's best tip is to give your hypercharge super to the brawler on your team with the longest hypercharge rate. The reason why you want to do this is because, of course, brawlers like Crow, Fang, they're going to take forever to charge that hypercharge super. You're giving them for free. It just makes their life a lot easier. Sam's tip is to make sure that you're always looking for walls when pushing up and abuse them as much as possible. Good Sam players are pretty much always using their super to get extra speed and healing. Sandy's tip is to know that their main attack hits from left to middle, and then to right. So it's actually easy to hit somebody with the left side of your attack, and especially if you need quicker damage, make sure you're focusing your left side of your attack on them. Shade's tip is to make sure that you're effectively cycling your supers one after each other, because if you didn't know, the speed from the super that you get stacks every single time. So if you start chaining 2 or 3 or 4 supers in a row, you'll get some crazy speed boost and opponents won't be able to do anything. Shelly's tip was really difficult because she's a super noob friendly brawler, but the biggest tip for me is just to make sure you're super in as close as possible. Might sound super simple, but that just allows you to hit more super projectiles, dealing more damage, charging up your super much quicker. This is just the best thing to do with Shelly. Spike's tip is actually to counter people countering your curveballs. So if you don't know how to dodge curveball consistently, there's a million YouTube videos on that already. But the way to counteract that is to make sure that you're shooting your spike shot a lot closer to the opponents. Of course, you want to do that anyway to maximize damage, but this really catches people off guard and they can't dodge curveball whatever if it's that close. Sprout tip that I love is the fact that you can have 2 walls out at the same time. So essentially, you got to get your first super, and then when you throw that down, you have that 10-second period to try and get another super. It's actually pretty difficult to pull off, but if you can, then what you can do is throw out that second super, and just before it lands, so throw this super a large distance, then gadget, and then you have another super available. Throw that super and you've got 2 supers out at the same time. The reason why this is so good is because you can use it to literally box people in. Squeak's tip is to make sure that you're not just spamming out your attacks. People do this very frequently with Squeak. Make sure you're using your attack to push the opponents back all the way into spawn. It's all about zoning with Squeak's attack. Stu, I've got a couple of tips for him. So the first one is moving from left to right, just so you're able to hit more shots more effectively and charge super a lot easier. And then the next one is actually to keep your finger close to the super button. So especially if you're going to be chaining supers a lot against an easy matchup, I don't know, like a tank. So just make sure you're actually spamming the super button because you're able to attack and then super really quickly. Surge's tip is to make sure that you're shooting just before supering. This of course allows you to get more DPS, but it actually makes it so you can charge your next super a lot quicker. Of course, Surge's super is so good at knocking back the opponents and allowing for easy kills, so you want to do this. Tara's tip is to know that you can use her super to break walls, so whether that's to catch the opponents by surprise, whether that's scoring in Brawl Ball, this can be really effective. Nick's best tip is to use his attacks to zone the opponents, especially at maximum range. So there's nothing more annoying than a tick just tickling you to death and keeping you away from him on maps like Shooting Star. And the final one is with Willow. So the best way to use Willow is using her super to waste opponent's supers. So for example, if it's a hypercharged Mortis running at you or a Buzz with super, or you can just use your super on them and they've completely wasted all of their utility. So that's going to be it for today's video. A lot of these brawlers are such low skill cap that there's hardly any tech to them, and there's also some really useless tech that a lot of people are putting out on YouTube Shorts, TikToks, etc. that you just don't need to know. So I've tried to put these in a concise list so you guys actually learn from these tips.